We're talking new kids on the block, all that and more when we return.
Welcome to the Devy Devotional Podcast, a show devoted to college prospect evaluation with a fantasy football focus. With your hosts, John Arrington, Aaron Wilcox, and Andy Starr. This podcast brings you actionable strategies and player-driven analysis for your Devy, C2C, and Dynasty leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive into the new kids on the block, the new names in Devy, or at the very least C2C. Welcome into the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, John Arrington, joined as always by Aaron Wilcox and Andy Starr. And tonight we said, you know what, we've talked about the 26 class, we talked about the 27 class, we even talked about the 28 class, but now there's players that slip through the cracks all the time, and eventually they end up being players that matter. Ricky Pearsall's of old and things like that. Players that get drafted in the first round of drafts that you might not realize at first. We're going to try and mention some of those players that are kind of coming out of nowhere, whether they're young or old or in between, and figuring out, are these players actually going to matter for Devy purposes and all that. We appreciate you guys being here for episode 102, and I think it'll be a lot of fun mentioning all these new names, not talking about the same old guys that we always like to bring up. I'm going to do my best to not bring up my favorite players over and over again like I tend to do. But first, let's check in with the boys. Aaron, how are you doing tonight, buddy?
Yeah, doing well. It's nice just to discuss these new players, like guys who have been showing out who we just have not gotten around to discussing yet. So some maybe not new players that nobody's ever heard of before per se, but yeah, just kind of new content, guys that we got to feature and talk about a little bit. So yeah, I'm excited.
Absolutely, and I just realized that I still have my blue light glasses on. Andy, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. Just getting through the week here. Same old, same old. But yeah, we actually have football on tonight. If anyone's wondering, we're in the midst of 49 straight days of either NFL or college football, so that's exciting. So if you're a big New Mexico State or Liberty fan, you can watch them instead of us. But I think you'll learn more here.
Probably, I actually did set all of my lineups today just to make sure that I didn't get caught, because I know last year I got caught a couple times where I didn't set my auto subs in time on like when they had Maction and everything, and then that'll ruin your week if you don't do it, because then you truly have to pay attention, and it's tough, man. You got a job and kids and all that kind of stuff, trying to sit there on Saturday at like noon, 3:30, and whenever else, trying to keep up or keep track of who's going to be in and out of college football. Yeah, that does not work out too well. So thank God for the auto subs. Hopefully we'll get that in the league of record one of these days, but not just yet. All right, so like I said, we don't have any fun games for you this time, unless Aaron has. Aaron's gonna ask us our top 5 favorite foods to like sneak into the movie theater or something like that. I don't know.
That was fun. We will have to come up with some more things like that. We did a blind rankings pod last week, and it's definitely worth the listen just for the fun and some of the madness which ensued. But I think we actually all did a pretty good job coming up with some rankings.
Absolutely. All right. Speaking of rankings, some of these players have moved into the tops of our ranks, and yet we haven't really talked about them. So why don't we inform the listeners, inform ourselves, because I have no idea who Andy's going to bring up here. What you got for us, buddy?
Well, it's a guy that I've been talking to you guys about, and I called dibs on him before we started this show, and that's Texas Tech running back Cameron Dickey, who exploded last week for 263 yards and 2 touchdowns, added 3 catches through the air, and he's a guy that I tweeted about after week 1 when he had 90 yards and a touchdown, but then he kind of disappeared against Kent State, and I think that was more just because Texas Tech was never in danger of losing that game. He still had 2 touchdowns in that game, but he only had 10 yards. And then since then, he's bounced back, 72 yards, 67 yards, 96 yards, scoring touchdowns all along the way. And more importantly, has maintained a over a 10% big time run rate, which is obviously what I'm looking for in my running backs. He's only a second year guy. Again, the first week he didn't catch any passes. He's been catching passes now. He has 9 catches on the season, over 1.5 yards per out run, which is great for a running back. He's doing it, like I said, this is his second year. He's got the size. He's 5'10, 215. And after last week, I'm officially very excited about him. I want to see where things go from here, but I think at this point, with where we're at with the 2027 running back class, this is a guy that certainly deserves to be mentioned at the top of that list.
Well, I'll tell you what, Debbie Beth completely agrees with you because he skyrocketed after this last game. That's the only thing that scares me about it is he went from he went from RB 41 to RB 2 in Debbie Beth after this last week's performance. And obviously that's counting his full career. It's not just this season. It's not anything. And I think it's more about how bad the other RBs have been, even more than like him necessarily. I mean, obviously he had that amazing game. That being said, he's still only sitting like not quite 11% big time run rate on the season. How much of that was from that one game? I wasn't truly paying attention before, so I can't tell you. I know he had a 7% big time run rate last year, and so 7% is right at that cutoff of like you're not really doing it for me. Like I really want like 7.5, 8% at the very least. 7% right there at that like lowest threshold. So if he can continue at the pace that he's doing at, then I think we're okay. If he gets back to that 7%, then I think we have to like at least pump the brakes a little bit.
So
Yeah,
to answer
I mean,
that
Dickey,
question, sorry, Aaron, but before this week he was just under 10%. He had 7 big time runs on 71 carries. So
Okay.
he was doing well
so
beforehand.
he's still doing better than he was before.
Yeah.
Yeah, the guy was able to rip off a couple of chunk plays before this last week, but obviously this last week, just against Kansas, playing out of his mind, 263 rushing yards. That 71-yard rushing touchdown was, I mean, the blocks were kind of insane. I don't think that it was him creating by any means, just ran straight through the middle. It was blocked perfectly and was able to just outrun everybody. And he had a great 69-yard reception, nice for a touchdown last week, which was also an explosive play too against Houston. But yeah, Cam Dickey, he's stepping up in a way that nobody really expected. I mean, at the beginning of the season, transferring in Quentin Joyner, coming in from USC, we thought he was going to be the guy that he sustained an injury. He's out for the year. We thought that there was it Jacoby something? I don't know why I'm blanking on his name, but he was the assumed, next up guy, but Dickey was also relevant. And Dickey's obviously forced himself into some carries here. But I do see, I mean, I'm a little bit concerned outside of this game where he just blew up. Like it was 4 yards per carry, 5 yards per carry, 4 yards per carry, 1 yard per carry. Not super productive in the passing game. So obviously he's a very relevant guy at this juncture, right? He's a huge riser. He has to be. He has the size. He has apparently the athleticism to rip off some big plays, but I'm just a little bit cautiously optimistic. He is more in my top 15 in Devy quarterback or running back ranks right now, but I'm hesitant to put him a lot higher than that.
Yeah, and I would always expect somebody that moved up 40 spots. I would always expect them to drop back down. Assuming normal games after that. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say he's not going to rush for 260 yards a game. Here on out. So I would expect him to drop down a little bit, but just to ease any fears about like Debbie Beth or anything like that, like half of the reason why he hit or moved up is because he hit an attempts threshold. I try to, if you've only attempted a certain amount of rushes, I try to like really push you down the ranks. So obviously the big game helped, but it was also the amount of touches that he had in the game that pushed him over probably a couple different thresholds, and that helped him move up as well. So he would have moved up regardless of the game. If he just had 100 yards in a normal game or whatever, he still would have moved up with like 20, 25 touches, whatever. He probably would have, maybe gone to the 20s or something to that effect. But then obviously he puts up the game that he does, it bumps him up into the top five. Like I said, I don't know that I necessarily expect him to stay there, but at the same time, I mean, I'm not seeing anything truly like blaring or glaring saying like, yeah, like this is a terrible player and he just had one good game either. So I'm kind of in the middle there. Obviously, like I think that I don't want to necessarily go out and do my DLF ranks and put him at 2, but at the same time, I'm perfectly fine with him being at the very least in my top 15.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with him too. He was just a waiver wire ad for me in a lot of places after week one because I like to try and get in early on a lot of these guys. His big time run rate was there. And I was like, okay, well, Texas Tech, Taj Brooks was a good CFF guy for a long time. Worst case scenario, maybe he's a CFF player for a long time. But now I'm starting to feel some Devy appreciation for him.
Yeah. And I believe that player you were thinking about was Jacoby Williams, Aaron. Is that right? Not that he's overly important or anything like that. I mean, I guess the good news is there's really no one overly important on that on that squad besides Dickey, who's obviously standing out. So we'll have to see. But that's definitely a great call out. And once again, probably the biggest jump in Debbie Beth this entire season. Just about it was wild. Andy reached out in the chat and he said, "I'm really interested to see what Debbie Beth has to say about Cameron Dickey." And so as soon as all the stats were out and everything, I threw it in there, and so I looked, and sure enough, he was at 41, and then bam, he was at 2, and I was like, oh, okay. All right, Aaron. We got Cameron Dickey on the charts here. Who you got for us?
A guy that I have come around to, who's definitely a riser, and we have not really spent time talking about him on this podcast, but it's a wide receiver out of Louisville, and that is Chris Bell. Chris Bell, a senior wide receiver, 6'2", 220 pounds, very explosive, or I think the anticipation is that he will test very well at that size. He's really had a breakout season. His targets have just been trending up and up and up as the season went on. So against more stiff competition and where they've actually had to compete versus the first 3 games, pretty easy MAC type of competition. Last couple of weeks, Pitt, Virginia, and they've had to throw a lot more, and they've relied on him. He's been a target hog and very productive. Versatile this season. Guy has the size, but also enough playmaking ability where I think he could be like a Nico Collins type of receiver at the next level. It needs to land in the right spots and all these things, but he was sneakily productive last season. Yes, he was not dominant. Red Ja'Cory Brooks was there as well, but at Louisville now he's stepping up this season even more so after some nice flashes. So we're finally seeing that potential that everybody's kind of been waiting for the last couple of years. I was always hesitant to give it to him up until he's actually done it, which this season he's on pace to do it, right, to have that true breakout, more dominant season.
Yeah, I can't say that I absolutely love the player, but I think we kind of, if I remember correctly, we kind of just shat all over him in the beginning of the season or in the off season, and so I mean, I guess we do have to kind of give him his flowers. He's definitely done better than I expected him to do. That being said, he's sitting in a range of players that like they can easily be drafted. They can even be drafted highly sometimes, but they're not necessarily players that I'm overly excited about. And I guess that goes back to I was actually having this conversation with a guy at DLF, and he said his rankings for DLF are based on how he feels players are going to be drafted. And I said, that's just not how Debbie Beth works. Debbie Beth doesn't care, or Beth in general doesn't care where they get drafted. It's are you good or are you bad? And so obviously, I'm not saying I'm right and that person's wrong or anything like that. Everyone's doing their own thing, and that's why we have multiple rankers and all that kind of stuff. But if you're looking for who could possibly get drafted in the first as a surprise pick, yeah, go with Chris Bell. If you're looking for who's a stud that I truly believe in, maybe I'm pumping the brakes a little bit.
Yeah, but I mean, we've seen enough where we don't, at least at this point, we're not really thinking he's bad per se, right? I mean, he's doing the right things to step up, and if he's going to test
No.
super explosively, potentially get that early draft capital, like you said, he's got a lot of things trending his way to kind of turn around that profile. So I'm intrigued by it. In the last 2 weeks, I had to look up his target numbers: 16 targets and 14 targets. So the guy's becoming much, much more prominent within that passing offense. If that trend even somewhat continues, double-digit targets per game, he'll continue to rise this season, I think.
We can also look at his at his teammate from last year. We started getting kind of hyped about Ja'Cory Brooks. Like, this is a player that was always overhyped when he was at Alabama, and then he goes over to Louisville, and all of a sudden he starts just dominating. And we're like, well, maybe we were right about him being good after all. And yet here we are, like, he barely got drafted, or got drafted late, and then obviously hasn't done anything in the NFL. Who knows if he ever will. I don't know that anyone's like overly excited about Ja'Cory Brooks in the NFL. So, and he put up over 1,000 yards, right at 1,000 yards last year. Now, I'd say Chris is actually on pace for a little bit more than that. So we could say that possibly he's even better than that. But I still think we're looking at like a similar trajectory. So once again, I'm with you. We can definitely say he's not bad. I'm not saying he's a bad wide receiver. I'm just saying I don't want to fall into like, oh, he could be a first round guy, because honestly, when it's all said and done, I don't really care.
Yeah, that's fair. And RIP Ja'Cory Brooks, because those off the field or whatever issues he's dealt with throughout his career really kind of robbed us of a great prospect, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, real quick for me on Chris Bell, I tweeted that he was going to be early on, because we were talking. You mentioned that we were not very high on him, and I said it just seems like he's going to be the most overrated wide receiver in this class, and I can say that that's not going to be true anymore. Just based on what we've seen so far, he's almost at 3 yards per out run, but it is his fourth season. The yards per team pass attempt has never really trended above the line where you want to see. And the fact that he did get that preseason hype, and he's kind of living up to the hype, and not in like an extreme way, but good enough to where people are going to keep him in that first round conversation. And if that's where he ends up, I just feel like Dynasty Twitter is going to be all about this guy, and it's going to be at a spot where I'm not willing to pay that price. But I will admit that I didn't think he was going to do this well, and I have to give him credit, because at this point he's having a pretty good season. But I'd probably like view him the same way I kind of viewed Ty Felton last year, where I'm not. He seems like a great late second round, early third round pick, but the way it's going right now, it seems like it's probably going to be something a lot more expensive than that.
Yeah, I'd probably look at him more like an AD Mitchell, where I just there's people want to draft him, people want to draft him early, and even in the NFL for whatever reason is going to fall in love with that player, but then they rarely turn into anything in the NFL. I'd put him more towards that. Ty Felton always kind of felt more like a sleeper, where we're not really calling Chris a sleeper here, especially the way that the NFL and
yeah,
other
that's
analysts
what I mean.
are feeling.
That's what I mean. I feel like if you're gonna value him anyway, it would be as a sleeper. But since he's not looked that way, I'm gonna be priced out.
Right.
I'm predicting anyway.
Right, and no, Chris Bell can no longer be the most overrated player in college football, because Denzel Boston exists, and so here we are. I guess I will. Actually, you know what? I said I was going to let you guys throw out a couple before I interjected. So, Aaron, you got another one for us?
Yeah, I can go with the quarterback position. Just kind of curious where you guys come in on Ty Simpson for Alabama, who's been standing out so far this season. Guy that we have not discussed in depth, but certainly has flashed all the things that we were looking to see out of him this season, except for that first game. I really don't know what happened out of the gates. If you watch that first game of the year, you might have been a little bit confused at like where's the hype coming from here for Ty Simpson, but the rest of the way he's been very very solid, right? So ever since that Florida State loss, he's been efficient with the ball. He's not really turning over the ball. I mean, he's doing what he needs to do and orchestrating that offense. It seems like the leadership qualities are there. A lot of good things going his way. Ty Simpson, I had hope for him maybe coming out as a freshman. It's just taken him a long time to truly get some opportunity, but he's taking advantage of it in a system that's pretty QB friendly historically. So whether you want to look at the Alabama system or the DeBoer system going back to Washington and some of the prior offenses he's run, it's usually pretty quarterback friendly, and he's got some great weapons. So we have to take that into consideration. Is he getting boosted just from that system, just from the surrounding cast, right? The offensive line, etc. That is at Alabama. But at the end of the day, he's doing everything that we should expect out of him. So I think he needs some credit, definitely some recognition from the podcast here. I'm very intrigued to see if he can keep it up rest of the season.
I think this is a pretty simple one where I think you nailed it. Like the supporting cast is helping him along. We've seen that with other players. I think Quinn Ewers is probably an easy one that we can look at and say, this is a player who was raised by his supporting cast throughout the years. Xavier Worthy and Gunnar Helm and whoever else. Obviously Bijan at one point. I think they played together. I don't remember. But I mean, Ty Simpson throwing to Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard. I mean, they obviously even have the greatness of Isaiah Horton. Even I mean, like as Andy knows. I think we're looking at a player who's only throwing the ball 7.9 yards down the field for his A dot this season. His big time throw rate has gone up to 6% from 3.7% last year, but last year was a small sample. But it's gone up to 6% this year. But I think we can lend that more towards the players, and being that he's not hitting the threshold I look for intended air yards, I don't even necessarily care. He's being very safe with the ball, which is nice. But part of the reason why I look at intended air yards so much is because I want to see, can you still be safe with the ball while pushing it down the field, and we're not seeing that at all. And so if he gets asked to do anything in the NFL beyond dinking and dunking or whatever, if he doesn't end up with Sean Payton as his coach, we're probably looking at a quarterback that's not going to make it in the NFL, I would assume. So I'm not falling for it. I know a lot of people tend to be. Obviously, to your credit, he has moved up in Devy, Beth. He has to have, but it's not enough. Like he's directly behind Diego Pavia right now in Devy, Beth, and I think we all know that Diego Pavia is not going to be an NFL QB.
We do.
I'm sorry, we do.
Oh, okay. All right. No. Yeah, I mean, Ty Simpson's looked great. Anytime he throws 16 touchdowns, only have one interception, you must be doing something right. I don't necessarily think his supporting cast is all of the reason that he's doing so well. Like, let's not forget that Ryan Williams has missed a lot of time, and Jeremy Bernard's great, but he's just one guy. Like, nobody's fawning over Jam Miller as like a guy who can take pressure off the passing game as a big time running back or anything like that. But yeah, the question obviously is, can he throw the ball further down the field and maintain that 70% accuracy? Obviously not maintain it, but at least get to a spot where we're comfortable, and he's producing at a similar level. But it's a good start. Unfortunately, we're already in his fourth season, so we're probably not going to get to see too much more of him after this year, especially when you got guys like Mel Kiper already having him in the top 25 on his big board. So it feels like he's probably going to come out this year. I feel like the quarterback's so up in the air that he might be a guy that ends up being a first-round draft pick just because there's nobody else that's really solidifying themselves as that person yet. And if Alabama goes on a big run, makes it to the playoff, starts winning games there, who else is it really going to be? I mean, I have a few guys that it could be, but if people see the Alabama name and he's winning games and he's not throwing interceptions, he's accurate. Yeah, certainly somebody could probably take a chance on him in the first round. So I think it definitely deserves to be. He definitely deserves to be mentioned as somebody who's Devy viable at this point because he's done everything right, everything that you want him to do at this point. But and maybe it's just the state of quarterbacks today. Like this is just what they're going to be from now on. But and he's also one of the rare cases of a guy who was like a 5-star recruit who's stayed at his elite program for 4 seasons despite not being a starter. So that's working in his favor as well. But need to see a little bit more, but can't be upset with where we're at right now.
I'm actually looking at a similar comparison here, and what I'm seeing is Spencer Rattler as like the closest comparison for him. Another player who had a decent big time throw rate, but was the intended air yards were not there. Obviously, we see him starting in the NFL. I don't know how long we assume he'll actually be starting, and I don't think that that's even necessarily a normal circumstance. But at the same time, like Andy was saying, like the way that QBs are right now, I just it seems like he could be that if that's what you're looking for. He could be that 3rd round pick that eventually starts for a little bit, but I don't see too much more than that.
I think the issue I'm seeing with a couple of the comps thrown out is just like I could understand why he might be similar in the model, but as far as a player goes, Spencer Rattler, he was careless with the ball. Like he had way too many, 32 interceptions, I think, in his collegiate career. And I believe Quinn Ewers, I mean, he was throwing picks like candy there for a while. 12
I think
interceptions his last year. Right?
Rattler calmed everything down once he went to South Carolina, and I guess that's more of the comp is who he became
Sure.
in Carolina more than his entire college career.
I could see that, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I do see Simpson as being the more safe passer. I actually think of him more similar to a J.J. McCarthy. I understand that he doesn't have multiple years of starting. He's not, at this point, like a championship pedigree type of prospect, right? He needs to continue to grow this season, like Andy said. But if he continues on this trajectory, very safe with the ball, mobile enough player, but not a Konami code, but definitely mobile enough. I think there's some similarities to that type of play style at least, and maybe a bit more of that safe type of quarterback that we haven't seen truly unleash the ball at the college level. But I mean, I don't want to slight JJ McCarthy either as a college player. He's a very underrated prospect.
Yeah, I mean the weird thing is, Simpson's an old player, oldish. He's a senior, and yet we've barely seen him play. So it's so hard to like truly gauge how we're supposed to even look at that player. I mean, I guess we could throw out a bunch of like Mac Jones. Was an older player, who comes in and does that. So there's so many different comps we can make. I guess the easiest way to say is like he has moved into that realm of like realistically being drafted and things like that. Even if you don't necessarily love the player, you have to admit that he could possibly be drafted, and he might be worth a 3rd or 4th round pick or something like that in your rookie drafts.
Yeah, and I think the Mac Jones shout out is good. Is it perfect? No, but it's the right idea. A guy who's pretty safe with the ball, efficient enough in the college game, but when it comes to pro prospects, is he going to be the real deal? That's a little bit more questionable, right?
Right, and you see, I mean, Mac Jones can have value. He can be a valuable player. He can even win you weeks and stuff, but I don't know about the long-term prospects or anything like that. Well, obviously we'll have to wait and see. All right, Andy, Aaron gave us 2. I think you've only given us 1, right?
Yeah, I'll stick with quarterbacks. And this is a guy who I don't know, he's not under the radar, I don't think, but he's certainly a guy that we haven't really talked about extensively on the pod. And it's Notre Dame's quarterback, CJ Carr, who is quietly becoming like one of my, if not the top Devy quarterback for me right now. Just the things he's been doing as of, the last 2 or 3 weeks has really been astounding. Everything you want to see. Yards per attempt is at 10 yards. A dot is 11.3 yards. Big time throw rate over 5%. Uh, he's throwing touchdowns. He's keeping the ball safe. He's not throwing a lot of interceptions. He's only a second year guy. He's, like I said, you talk about the struggles of DJ Lagway and the struggles of Arch Manning, even though, I feel like he's bouncing back somewhat, but it's a slow process from the start of the season.
Yeah.
But CJ Carr has really come out and, for a guy who it seemed like he wasn't even going to be a starter a week before the season, and all of a sudden he was. He's done an absolutely great job, and like I said, it's kind of hot takey, but he's right there as like maybe the top quarterback in Devy, just based on what we've seen so far for me.
CJ Carr has moved up to QB2 in Debbie Beth so far. And I think once, I hate saying this, but like I think once again, it's because how poorly other QBs have been playing. But that's not to take anything away from Carr. He's been playing very well. The only reason why I would say, like, generally speaking, I would assume that there would be more QBs ahead of him is he just does not run at all. Like, honestly, he's basically what people wanted Garrett Nussmeier to be. Like he's Garrett Nussmeier but good at football. And but he just does not run. He has 1 yard per carry. Like he doesn't do it. And so that's the only thing that scares me off for Devy purposes, for fantasy football purposes. But he does seem to be a good passer of the ball, which we obviously have to evaluate at least a little bit. So, I know in this day and age, we're obviously moving more towards mobile quarterbacks. You see Drake May, you see, Jackson Dart, what they're doing in the NFL right now on top of everyone else that we already had. That's the norm, but that doesn't mean that somebody who doesn't run as much can't thrive in the right system or something like that. And obviously, we have plenty of time. I don't, Carr's not coming out this year, and so we still have plenty of time to see if he can evolve or do anything, beyond what he's already done. So I love the player. Debbie Beth loves the player. It was a really rocky and tumultuous beginning to his career and everything, but here we are. I don't think anyone can truly deny what he's done so far.
I think the time is right to recognize CJ Carr, especially with the schedule ahead. After this week, I believe they're playing USC. It gets a lot easier for them. They've had a really tough start to the year, but I think they should continue to trend up as the year goes on. So, definitely intrigued with what he's done thus far. He needs to continue to take care of the ball. I have no issues with his 3 interceptions thus far this year. Just needs to make sure those don't compile. But they have such a strong running game. Like they can really rely on that, and that makes his job so much easier. So I'm curious to see how that goes in future years. But yeah, Carr, yeah, definitely a guy who he could layer the ball pretty well. He shows good accuracy and touch, even on those deeper passes. And I actually thought coming out of high school, like just watching him, like he has a fair amount of mobility. I know he's not utilizing it as a fantasy threat or a rusher, but I actually recognize him as a fairly mobile quarterback, not for rushing purposes again, but just for extending plays, which is nice to see. Nowadays, you want that versus a guy who's just stuck there, statue in the pocket, like just a sitting duck. So he's got that going his way, though obviously the rushing threat is not going to happen. But yeah, no, CJ Carr, solid enough player. I don't know. I think it's interesting looking this week. Like, again, I believe they're playing USC because I saw this comparison earlier that like Maeva and him, they're gonna have a nice duel this coming week because like the quarterback ratings very similar, yards per attempt very similar, touchdowns to interception ratios very similar between Maeva and Carr. That should be an excellent game.
Yeah, that'll be a fun one. Maeva's done better than I expected, but he's also kind of fallen off since he started hitting better competition. So I think this will be a really good game to see. Has it been a fluke because of like the easy first few games, or is this who Maeva actually is? So this will be a fun one. Actually, I guess for both really. But like you said, I mean, Carr's kind of already proven it. They've had a pretty rough gambit to start the season, so you can't even say that he's not already kind of proven what he's done. Which is why I feel even more confident in being okay saying like, even if he doesn't end up there by the end of the season, saying that he's a top five QB right now is not a stretch by any means. I don't think. I'm perfectly fine having him up there. And Debbie Beth is pretty quick with that kind of stuff. Obviously, we know it's going to take a lot of people. It's going to take consensus a long time to get there. But I think we'll start seeing that natural progression towards him being closer to a top five QB, assuming he continues playing like he has been. I don't really see any reason to assume he doesn't. And speaking of a player that I don't see any reason to assume that it's just going to stop all of a sudden, Desmond Roebuck out of Washington is the first player I'm bringing up. I did not truly know who he was. He was not on. He was not in my top 40, or I guess top 30 wide receivers in Fresh Beth. I did not have him graded. I didn't really have a grade or any idea of how I felt about him or anything like that. But he's a true freshman, goes over to Washington, and I mean, it might be controversial or whatever, but I believe he's actually taking over as the wide receiver one, or I believe he will have taken over as the wide receiver one by the end of the year if he doesn't, or if he hasn't already, or if he isn't already making that progression. Uh, Guy has 18 receptions for 331 yards, 18.4 yards per reception, two tutties, and it's only getting better. Each week seems to be getting better. I was listening to Back to Devy, the Campus to Canton pod, and they were talking about Roebuck, and they were trying to, figure out, is it real, is it not real? And this is from a week ago, so obviously they were talking about from a couple weeks ago. I don't even know if the game had actually happened yet, or if it had. They were talking about it, but they were worried about his athleticism. And maybe Aaron can answer this for me, but I mean, from what I've seen, I see no concerns about his athleticism whatsoever. But it seemed like maybe their athleticism tool or whatever had him as a kind of a slower player, or worse traits, or whatever it might be. I know that's not always perfect, because obviously players can get better, get faster. Look at Saquon, and there's plenty of other examples of it as well. So it's not the end all be all, but they were concerned about the athleticism. Once again, I'm not seeing anything that's showing me that he can't be an X, a true X, whatever. And everyone seems to be all in on Denzel Boston, and he's at the very least matching what Boston's doing, if not more, as a true freshman, and Boston's a senior. I mean, call it what you want, but I look at that as this freshman is taking over, and that's the kind of person I want on my teams. I've added him on multiple C2C squads, and I'm kind of mad that I let Aaron add him in WU. I wish I had not allowed that to happen, but here we are. I think this is a player. I mean, look at how excited people are for Denzel Boston. Okay, well, give me Denzel Boston, but a freshman and better. I'm loving me some Roebuck right now, and that's why I brought him up.
He's got a good, smooth amount of athleticism. Maybe not one of those guys who jumps off the page. So I could see why the testing was maybe kind of meh, or questionable, maybe coming out of high school. The guy was not a high-end prospect by any means, or a high-end recruit, I should say. So not a guy I scouted, but definitely have come to appreciate him, and I've watched him a bunch. And I think his athleticism is going to be just fine. So despite what we saw out of some previous testing, I am not going to be concerned at all about the athleticism there. I think he has enough juice. What do you think about Roebuck there, Andy?
I let you guys banter about him for a long time. I was kind of just let's wait and see a little bit. After last week, I would say I'm much more in than I was prior to last week. He's getting involved more. He's getting targeted more on a per route basis, which is obviously what you want to see. That Maryland game, he had 4 catches for 61 yards, but he ran 43 yards or 43 routes in that game. And then he came back against Rutgers last week, got 108 yards on only 22 routes, and that's bumped him up for his yards per route run over 2, which for a true freshman is just an auto smash at that point. So I'm on board. I'm certainly not wavering anymore. If he's available, I think anybody should go and get him. But I think after this weekend, he's probably not going to be available in a lot of spots. So, but I don't know where exactly to rank him just yet, but he's definitely, when you look at this class of freshmen, you got Malachi Tony and a few other guys who have stepped up, but he's got to be right there, mentioned with the top people in the. I guess this would be the 2028 class now. So, yeah, he's there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm looking at it here. Roebuck has 331 receiving yards versus Boston's 444. I could see that like swapping by the or flipping by the end of the year, where Roebuck could even have more, or at least be really close. So yeah, a player that I'm definitely excited about. Oh, can you guys not hear me?
Now we could hear you, but yeah, I think you switched over to your computer mic.
You know what? I I made the mistake of pushing on a cord, and
Oh,
I think it kind of like restarted me. I don't even know if it's going to let me go back to my mic, so I apologize if I don't sound great. Hopefully, this will get cleaned up in the AI producer will clean it up for us in post production. But yeah, sorry about that. All right, so that's probably enough about him. Who's got one for me?
I could throw out another one. This is kind of a weird one, I think. Um, I'm gonna go back to wide receivers. Well, I won't make it that weird because I don't want to. I don't want to get into the deep dives before we start talking about the guys that should actually matter. But it's Illinois' wide receiver Hank Beatty, who I know we mentioned earlier in the year when we were talking about the woes of Hudson Clement, who had a decent game last week. By the way, let's not forget about old Hudson Clement, but Hank Beatty currently at 617 yards on the season, a couple touchdowns. I think he's thrown for a touchdown as well, which obviously you love to see. Almost 4 yards per route run. Yes, he's a fourth year guy. Before this, I think he's had like a total of 400 career receiving yards. So definitely a late breakout. But he's definitely a guy that, I guess you could kind of throw him in that same area about like who we were talking about earlier, whose name is already escaping me. Uh, Aaron's guy that he brought up, but like not necessarily in this. Oh, Chris Bell, but Chris Bell kind of had already flashed after his junior year, whereas Hank Beatty has not really done anything up until this point. So he's not, and he's certainly not getting the preseason hype. But from a season standpoint, Hank Beatty, same thing, just 300, 3 games with over 100 yards. The touchdowns aren't necessarily there, but like I said, he's getting used in all sorts of situations. He's getting screen routes. He's running deep routes. He can kind of do it all, and I think he's a guy that's probably gonna get an NFL team or multiple NFL teams to fall in love with him, and it'll probably end up being a day 2 pick, or at the very least a late or early day 3 pick.
I do think that BD is probably more of a day three type of pick. You're right. He's shown out this year. It's just I have a hard time really buying into the profile with the fourth year breakout after not being so relevant in past years, being at Illinois for his entire career thus far. And Illinois just has a pattern of doing this year after year. So it was him, before it was him, it was Pat Bryant, before it was Pat Bryant, it was Isaiah Williams for years, and we're not seeing the high end NFL production out of those guys. Not saying it couldn't happen for Beatty, but like at 5'11", 185 is more of like a pure slot guy. There's a route there. It's just kind of a narrow pathway, a route for him to really latch on and be a true difference maker. But I guess he is kind of an interesting guy we have not discussed. And so for the criteria of the show that we're doing here too, he is a riser and a guy we haven't discussed. Just maybe one of these guys where we discuss him once and we might not discuss him again unless he continues to ball out or improve and really blow up.
Yeah, I can't say I'm a big fan. And partially because of what he's done to my boy Hudson Clement. Although Clement has started coming around recently, it's not nearly as exciting as I was hoping it was going to be. But yeah, Beatty, whatever the hell his name is. I mean, he did nothing for 2 years. And then even his third year, he didn't surpass 300 yards. Now I'm kind of with Aaron here, where it seems more like, it's there's got to be a guy, and if it wasn't going to be Clement, I guess it had to be someone else. And so they're locking in on Beatty, and I mean, I will give him a low credit that his yards per reception has gone up every year. There are reasons why he's being brought up here. I guess I just don't necessarily want to believe it. But yeah, there's worse call outs. I will say his ADOT is lower than I would like to see, but that's probably leaning more towards what Aaron was saying, with him being more of like a slot only kind of receiver, like that kind of thing. So I think he should be mentioned. He probably will be drafted when it's all said and done. But yeah, not a player that I'm falling in love with.
I actually thought that Andy was going to bring up another guy we discussed privately, but has not been mentioned on the Devy Devotional yet. But that's Griffin Wilde. I don't know if that's how you say his name. Wild? Wilde.
I've been calling him Griffin Wild. So.
That's a guy who transferred from South Dakota State, Jackrabbits. So go Jackrabbits. One of my buddies, Aaron, he is a big Jackrabbits guy, so shout out there. But now that he's been showing out at Northwestern this season, I know you guys are interested. I'm still very hesitant with it. I'm like, I don't think the NFL is really going to care about a guy who's having a pretty solid third season at Northwestern, but he did just show up against, was it Penn State, and had a pretty big touchdown reception. But I'm a little bit hesitant, having already watched Wild, whatever. But tell me guys, is he a stud? Is he some sort of secret sleeper that everybody should know about?
I mean, I'm basically the one that brought him up in the first place, and you kind of shot it down right away. And I mean, the fact that you're bringing him up at least makes me think that you're giving him a little bit of credit here. So what I will say is, a lot of times, did Andy bring him up? I thought I did.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, my bad. I'm just stealing credit.
And then you're like, I love him. And then all of a sudden he became your guy.
Maybe that's what it is. Okay. Well, hey, you got to be quick in this business, right? A lot of times when I look at a guy who's like rising up in Devy Beth, especially for a wide receiver, and I'm trying to figure out, do I want to add him in C2C leagues? Is he going to be real? Is he not? A lot of times you'll look and he'll have like 2 big games, and then a lot of like smaller games, like, oh, he had 2 catches for 20 yards, 3 catches for 34 yards, and then 5 catches for 119 yards, and then 8 catches for 182 yards or whatever. He doesn't have that at all. Not that you would ever expect that with Northwestern, but I mean, he literally is just like almost not consistent, but maybe, but I mean, like just 94, 55, 98, 64, 94 yards receiving. Like, those are great receiving totals, especially when you consider the offense that they're playing in. I mean, he's kind of the offense. I think he's at like 40% for the market share, if I remember correctly. Yeah, 43% for the market share. So, I mean, you're talking about elite numbers at that point. And, I don't know if we can say he's an elite player, and I don't know if he's going to get the love. And that's the problem I've always struggled with college football. It's like, like you're talking about a Big Ten player. I get it's not like the sexy team and stuff from the Big Ten, but you're talking about a Big Ten player playing against Big Ten defenses, and he's playing really well in an offense that isn't really known for being this like, this crazy offense or anything like that. And yet he probably won't get the love that he deserves. So that's the kind of stuff that I hate.
Yeah, the reason I was on him, the reason I brought him up was because I drafted him in a few supplemental drafts, because he was one of my FCS to FBS guys. Because at South Dakota State, he had 1,100 yards receiving and 3.24 yards per route run. And that has not really slowed down at Northwestern, despite their offense just being anemic. He's almost at 500 yards receiving on the year. His yards per route run is over 3. He is technically only a third-year guy, so if you want, it's hard to quantify what an 1,100-yard season means at the FCS level, but South Dakota State is kind of like F FBS, like junior almost, more so than FCS. I feel like they can beat a lot of FBS teams. So he's playing with a talented group of people when he's on that team, and he's rising to the top there. Like there's a guy on South Dakota State right now. I think it's Trey Lance's brother, who people are talking about as like a Devy viable wide receiver, or maybe he's on South Dakota or North Dakota, one of the Dakotas. But either way, like he had an 1,100-yard season as a true sophomore, and now he's doing it in the Big Ten. He's probably gonna come close to, if not get to, 1,000 yards this season. He doesn't feel like a guy who's gonna come out this year just because it's Northwestern, and maybe he's just gonna go for a big NIL paycheck in the portal after this year. Because let's face it, it's Northwestern. His best case scenario would probably end up being like a day two pick and fighting for a starting position somewhere, which I believe he could probably get. But it would certainly be an uphill battle versus if he went somewhere else and did the same thing at like Georgia or Alabama or something, which I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but that seems like a better path for him if he continues on this trajectory.
Definitely a name that needs to be known by all means, and he could be the actual term sleeper. Like he could actually be a sleeper in the NFL draft and in rookie drafts when it all is said and done. If he comes out, he obviously still has eligibility and all that kind of stuff. But I just want to be very clear. Northwestern has thrown for 1,088 yards. 1,088 yards. He has 469 receiving yards on the year. So I just want to showcase what he's done in that offense. So I think Griffin Wild is a player, like I said, that needs to be known and needs to be talked about a lot more than he has been. So I'm glad that Aaron brought him up here. I was definitely going to bring him up, but I wanted to give you guys the opportunity to bring up some of this player as well.
I'm not a fan for the record, but I know he's your guys' boy, and I couldn't pass up the opportunity to let you guys hype him up before I tear him down. No, I'm just kidding. But we'll see. I've been begging John to add him and Devy you, but John won't do it.
I still have one ad. I might do it. I'm really I'm really questioning what I should do with that last ad. It really makes you think when you only have one left. So we'll have to see. Although I tried to add. Who was the player you added today?
King Miller.
Oh,
USC back.
Yeah, that's right.
This was a guy that I was going to bring up, so might as well since the surprise is out there. Like King Miller, breakout now. I told you guys this earlier. It's not like he really broke out without the aid of two significant injuries on his own team, but then we realized this guy is just insanely explosive. And so not only has this guy been breaking off big play after big play against, competent defense this last week, but he had some big plays like early in the season. So I remember him, like, I think it was week 1, and King Miller was breaking off huge plays for USC, but everybody was, right? So I didn't really think of it. But then I went back and I looked at, well, was he getting any hype this summer into the fall? And yes, he was their most explosive back per Lincoln Riley this offseason. He was averaging the most yards per carry in practice. And I'm like, oh, well, why wouldn't they play the guy who's the most explosive and efficient? Obviously, it took them a while to get to the conclusion. It only took 2 season-ending injuries, or just about, at USC for their backs to thrust him into that role last week. They even violated some college rules, and they played an inactive or an out running back because they're so desperate for guys just to get there in the backfield. Wow. They got a little slap on the wrist. They should have got in bigger trouble than that, because that's a big no-no just to say a guy was already ruled out with injury, and because you're desperate now you put him in the game. It's like, no, he's out. But wow. Anyways, but no, King Miller really showing that explosiveness as what a walk-on, a non-scholarship guy. That's amazing. And we were arguing earlier, is he a second-year guy? I think that was the consensus, but who really knows? I don't think he's a true freshman. He's listed that way in some areas, but I think he is at least his second year out of high school. But still, an exciting breakout guy. Rest of the season will be relevant and will be definitely rising up in the ranks. That's for sure.
Generally speaking, I trust 247 and what they have as far as dates and everything. And this is the first time where I think they probably made a mistake, because they have him as the class of 2023, which would make him technically a junior. Obviously, you have redshirt and all that kind of stuff, like a third year player, whatever you want to call it. Then then there's people saying, no, he's a true freshman. I think he is. I mean, it says he signed in 2024 as a walk-on, so I think he is a second-year player. But it's just the weirdest thing, because, like I said, I usually trust 247 and what they say, and a lot of times it'll be like the guy took a year off, the guy was injured, whatever it was, and people just don't necessarily realize it. This time, I don't see anything in the timeline that says that he took a year off or whatever. It's just saying that he was a 2023 class. I think it was a mistake. So I think he is a sophomore. I originally had him as a junior. Obviously, once I pushed him to a sophomore, that bumped him up even more in Devy Beth, and he's definitely taking strides in Devy Beth. But I guess we at this point now we need to see it in long term, and see it more on like the workhorse and not just the backup and not just the third string kind of guy. But like Aaron was saying, like he's got the big time run rate, he's got the big plays. So definitely like what I saw. I went after him in WU, and so I was going to use my last spot, but Aaron swooped in and snatched him up for twice what I put in for, although I did not have much money left, so it was okay.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my leagues are going to go through their waiver runs tonight, so I'm hoping to get a few King Millers. But yeah, it's ridiculous right now. It's like 8 breakaway yards per attempt, which is obviously not sustainable. But this is against Michigan, who was a top 25 team, albeit probably a bit overrated. But I don't think their defense is anything to rub your nose at or anything. And 8.8 yards per carry, 3 big time runs. He's ripping off 50-yard carries. He's catching a few balls, nothing crazy, but at least he's getting involved with the passing game. And now it seems like, where USC was previously using Waymon Jordan and Eli Sanders in kind of a split backfield, maybe now King Miller kind of takes the lion's share of those rushing opportunities. And in that case, like, we're talking CFF asset as well as potential Devy asset if he goes the rest of the year and continues on this same path that he's on and does everything that he has been doing up until this point.
I think that's all really fair. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely a player that we should be adding in C2C leagues. Obviously, Devy leagues we'll have more information by the time we get around to Devy drafts and things like that. I highly doubt he's on any Devy rosters, so we probably don't have to worry about that too much. Andy's asking if we're going to go long. I don't know how many more players. I know he said he had quite a few. I only had one more that I truly wanted to get out there. I have a list, but I don't really necessarily care about the rest. You guys will probably cover a lot of them going rapid fire. But, real quick, rapid fire-esque, Antoine Raymond out of Rutgers is a player who's been showing up in Devy Beth. And he's another one that I've kind of gone back and forth on adding in C2C leagues and things like that. He's already been added in a couple of my leagues, but I think he is available in another or two. Aaron saying I sniped him on the name. It's tough to fall in love with Rutgers players, going back to the Northwestern with Griffin Wild and everything, especially with the Rutgers running back. It's tough to get too excited here. But I mean, I'll tell you what, the only thing that really scares me a little bit is he's closer to that 7% big time run rate, which, like I said, is kind of like the bare minimum threshold that I look for. Beyond that, the PPR points per touch is there. Looks like he has the receiving game. He's obviously doing well in the backfield. He's obviously scoring a lot of touchdowns, which is pushing up the PPR points per touch. For C2C purposes, he's a great player to have. But honestly, he's moving into the mix where I think that he could actually be, viable for Devy purposes as well. and he's a true sophomore, so he obviously has another year, possibly 2 years, depending on what he does and all that kind of stuff. But he could even get better, as he progresses, gets older, and learns how to play the game even better.
I like it. Well, if I can go rapid fire real quick with a couple more running backs at least.
Sure.
I like the Antoine Raymond shout out. He was on my list of guys who's been surprisingly more explosive than I thought he was going to be. I always thought of him as a little bit more of like a plodding type of back, and he's definitely improved this season, been more versatile. I think Emmett Johnson, a Nebraska back who I liked as a sleeper coming to this season. He's just been taking advantage of the volume and breaking tackles at a very high rate. So is he a super explosive back? No. I don't think he's going to test that great. And he's probably more of like a day 2, potentially borderline day 3 guy, but he is showing what it takes to have a nice breakout season and very reliable workload. So I'm excited to see what he does this Friday night, Nebraska versus Minnesota. And Emmett Johnson is a Minnesota kid, so it's kind of not a revenge game, but he's got a lot to prove, and he's just been a very reliable player for them, and steady player for that Nebraska offense. And then Nate Shepard, I think we've probably already mentioned him. Maybe that's why he wasn't discussed earlier, but he is one of the most surprising true freshman breakouts, a phenomenal player at Duke this season. But Nate Shepard having a true breakout freshman season. He's been explosive, he's been exciting, and he's been getting some touchdowns kind of vultured away from him within that backfield, but I think in years to come, he should be able to carve out kind of that lead role and continue to be a explosive player, pairing pretty nicely with Darian Mensah, assuming that Mensah might stay another year, but we'll see with what the quarterback does there.
All right, I've got 2 wide receivers I definitely want to mention. The first is NC State's Terrell Anderson, true sophomore, 3.25 yards per route run, and I think he's over 400 yards for the season. He had a pretty big game last week. He's been on my radar for a little bit. He's on a few of my teams. I don't know why. I don't know what possessed me to add him, either in the off season or maybe he was like in one of my recruiting leagues where I got him as a freshman. No idea, but he is he's looking really good right now. Is certainly somebody that I want to keep paying attention to and add as we move forward here. And then a guy that I liked after week 1 this year, Tennessee wide receiver Braylon Staley, who's kind of had an up and down year, but has had 3 games of at least 97 yards or more. And then just last week against Arkansas, 6 catches for 109 yards. He's at 2.5 yards per route run for the season as a true sophomore. Another guy that I think we'll be talking about in the offseason as, somebody who's this is a really deep wide receiver class, as we all know. So it's hard to say that he's going to crack into the top 10 or anything, but talented enough to where teams are going to take a look at him in the NFL draft.
Yeah, I like that call, especially with Staley. Think he's kind of an underrated guy, next guy up type of thing at Tennessee. Yeah, otherwise I was going to throw out one freshman name at the wide receiver position, and that's Andrew Marsh, who's been really showing out for Michigan. I was able to draft him in one C2C league. I was not sold on him by any means as a guy coming out actually of high school, but he's been able to really flash some big playability and could be a key target there for Michigan for years to come. So we'll see what Bryce Underwood and Andrew Marsh can cook up together, but there's some very promising flashes thus far out of the freshman at Michigan. So Andrew Marsh, keep your eyes on him. He's probably not available in C2C leagues on waivers, but he's certainly a guy who was not like a hyped up like 5-star type of, he was just off the radar, right, as a solid 4-star recruit.
Yeah, I wasn't absolutely in love with him, especially I wasn't in love with him going to Michigan and what was going to, were they even going to get him the ball or anything like that? And yet he's doing well within that offense. So who's not passing great, but we're able to look at things like market share and things like that for that reason and say, just like with Northwestern and whatever else, like even if they're not passing a lot, he's doing well with what he's earned and everything. So that's definitely a good name to list. Honestly, the only other name that I truly wanted to bring up, and it's not a new name to college football, it's not a new name, but it is a new name to Debbie Beth as far as someone who's actually like standing out in Debbie Beth, and it's Danny Scudero out of San Jose State. Um, I think he's actually working his way into possible Debbie viability, and obviously he's been a name for a couple of years at least for C2C purposes, for CFF purposes, but I think he's working his way into actually like being a day two, day three at the latest pick, player that they could end up being. Like look at what Torrey Horton's doing, and things like that in Seattle, players like that could end up being that kind of guy when it's all said and done. I don't know that he's actually going to, be a stud in the NFL or anything, but definitely a player that you should know. And he was just nowhere even close to the top 100, top 50, or whatever. And I mean, now he's creeping pretty close to the top 20. So I think like you at least have to recognize what he's doing, albeit at small school. But it doesn't really matter when you're putting up those kind of numbers. I mean, we obviously saw what Ashton Genty did last year. We were able to forgive the school, forgive the conference and everything. I think we kind of have to do that at least a little bit with Scudero here.
Guy's been just dominant in college football this season. But I do have, I guess, two big issues with Danny Scudero. Is one is the size. How does a 5'9", 174-pound type of guy like that succeed at the next level, especially coming from like the G5 level? And he is a third-year player. Like he really couldn't get significant playing time as a freshman at Sacramento State, and his second year there, he was like third on the team in pecking order. So the guy's really just broken out of nowhere. But I do credit some of that with just great scheming and great coaching staff, abilities to elevate some of the receivers. We look at what they did last year with Marsh. What was his name there? I don't
Nick
think
Nash.
it was Marsh. Yeah, Nash. Thank you. But yeah, I think that San Jose's great at scheming up guys, and he is obviously the guy they want to funnel the ball to. So doing very special things this season, but those are just 2 points that concern me a little bit with the Scudero. But I mean, we have to acknowledge him, right? We haven't talked about him whatsoever this year, at least on this podcast.
And I think he's on pace to like double, or not double, definitely not double. He's on pace to surpass Nick Nash's numbers from last season. And if I remember correctly, Nash was a fifth-year player. Actually, he was a sixth-year player. I'm sorry. So he was a sixth-year player going up and getting 1,382 yards last year. And already Scudero is at, where'd he go? 845 through 6 games. So I mean, if he keeps it up, you're looking at 1,900 yards, or 1,700 yards that you're looking at compared to a 6-year player getting 1,300 or something like that. I'm not comparing the players. I'm not even saying this is not a player I'm overly excited about. But I think it's just in a pod that we are talking about new names. I've never mentioned him. I don't think he's been mentioned on the pod. So I think it was a good time to bring him up. But we are slightly over. I don't know how this happens where I look up and we're at like 29 minutes and then I look up again and we're at an hour. But here we are. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that one. It was fun talking about some new names. Obviously, there will be some more as the season progresses. We'll probably do a risers and fallers show here pretty soon. And so if there's any new ones beyond the ones that we've talked about, we can obviously talk about them there. But I love this time of year where Debbie Beth really starts settling in and you're not seeing as much craziness and everything. And it's a lot of fun seeing where these players go. And I'll tell you what, like I was a little concerned. Mario Craver jumped up so high in Debbie Beth at the beginning of the season. It's a little concerned, like maybe I'm overhyping him. And then I saw everything I needed to see. I know it was only 2 receptions, but there weren't that many receptions to go around in that last game. But just seeing that big playability and everything last week is like, no, he's just a stud. So Mario Craver still at wide receiver 2, and he will not be changing anytime soon. I do not believe so. You love to see it. Andy, why don't you give us some words of wisdom before we get out of here?
Words of wisdom that for me, I don't have. Add King Miller, I guess, if your waivers haven't run yet. Like, run to Fantrax, because I didn't have a lot of money in any of my unlimited waiver leagues, so it won't take much to outbid me if I am in a league with you. But just know that the claim is in, but you could probably beat me if you get there now.
That's the words of wisdom. That's all you needed to say. Have some damn patience on your waivers, people. Just you don't need to blow your fab in week one. There's so many. All these players are going up against FCS teams and things, and like there's going to be players that are, that are just.
Hey, you won't have Cameron Dickey in a league with me if you don't blow it all in week one. I'm sorry.
That's fair, and I'm not saying that you can't screw up by waiting. Obviously, there's definitely been times where if you wait beyond week one or whatever, you're going to screw yourself. But I think there's always going to be players that you want to add at some point. Even if you missed out on some stud or whatever, like there's always going to be a player you want to add. I just added what did I say his name was from Air Force. I should probably know his name.
Zarka.
Yeah, Liam Zarka. I just added Zarka in a league, and he's scoring like 45 points a week. Like, I'm not even overly excited about it, but this is a sophomore who will generally play 2 more years, and scoring 45 points a week. Like that's the kind of player that you can get by having a little bit of patience. But obviously, there's times where like I got Nate Shepard that Aaron brought up before. I got Nate Shepard by waiting and then seeing that he came around and all of a sudden he got the job and he ran with it, pun intended. That's not a player that you're going to get on week 1 or week 2 or something like that. You have to have a little bit of patience. Obviously, you can probably mix it up and have a little bit of both. Okay, I'm going to spend half my fab in week 1 and then or after week 1 and then save the rest and that kind of thing. But I think at least have a little bit of patience, because when you're going into week 3 and you have $1 or $2 left or something for the rest of the year, you're going to be kicking yourself a lot of times.
And Andy, to his credit, always seems to get that like breakout running back by adding
He
him right
does.
away in the season. Last year was like Caleb Johnson for Iowa, who just had a dominant season. So I guess
Yes.
the way to win at C2C, I mean, at least be prudent with your pickups. Make sure it's sound process, and at the end of the day, good things should go your way.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we appreciate you guys listening. We will be back in your ears as soon as possible, making sure that you are subscribed to the podcast wherever you can find podcasts. Make sure you have liked and subscribed on YouTube at the Gridiron Ratings YouTube channel. We will be back in your ears as soon as possible. Until then, we are cashing out. See you guys.